it's important to win the narrative along with the war or the battle, and so I think this is an important maneuver in this
Yeah.
regard. Is there merit in keeping some of these issues alive to at least frustrate China, even if we cannot concede anything out of it?
Also with us is Anushka Saxena, research analyst at the Takshashila Institution's Indo-Pacific Studies program. She specializes on the Chinese People's Liberation Army, China-Taiwan relations, and India's foreign policy, and curates the weekly Eye on China. Welcome, Ms. Saxena.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gopal.
I mean, there's a huge, the circles that are being run around India by the Chinese, in our neighborhood is also equally troubling. I mean, it's not just you've written extensively on Tibet. You've talked about, the impact that it's having on the Tibetan people. And I was very intrigued by the phrase used by former Indian ambassador to China, Nirupama Menon Rao, saying China is using Buddhism now as a geopolitical tool in Tibet over the Dalai Lama's reincarnation and in Nepal and Bhutan. It could possibly use the same tactics in Sri Lanka. So, what do you think that? What is your comment about China's footprint in our region, in the South Asian region, and is India's hold over South Asia also sort of weakening given its relationship now with Bangladesh and Myanmar?
Right. A two-part answer for this: first on Tibet, and then maybe on South Asia. I think Miss Menon Rao's articulation is really valid in the sense that yes, Buddhism, but more specifically the Dalai Lama issue, and the fact that there is a cynicization of religious beliefs and practices in the Tibetan Autonomous Region. All of these things, yes, make you believe that Buddhism is quote unquote a geopolitical tool. But I think there's a lot of nuance in this issue. First is the question of the Dalai Lama, right? And I think that is where China's big problem with India is, at least in today's day and context. Because from New Delhi's perspective, we have done our best to differentiate between the territorial issue, that is China's sovereignty over Tibetan Autonomous Region and the general Tibet area, and the issue of the Dalai Lama's political asylum in India and his leadership of one sect of Buddhism, which is the Gelug school. Right. So we have done our effort to make that distinction. But from the Chinese perspective, because now he celebrated his 90th birthday, and on the 2nd of July, the Dalai Lama came up with a statement that, my reincarnation will happen, it will happen. And in his book, then he wrote that it's going to happen in a free land and outside China. So because of these things, from Beijing's perspective, it continues to be an issue, and India is an enabler and an interferer in internal affairs. So this is obviously a structural mismatch in perceptions on this issue, and to be perfectly candid, there is nothing India can do about it to assuage concerns with Beijing, save for something drastic. So not allowing the putting pressure on the Central Tibetan administration to not have the 15th reincarnate be an Indian, or revoking asylum privileges for Tibetan refugees. So these are drastic measures, or recognizing the 15th appointee from Beijing's perspective that came up in China, right? So save for these measures, I think there is nothing at this juncture that India can do to assuage concerns. And frankly, the question we should ask ourselves is do we want to? Um, uh, is there merit in keeping some of these issues alive to at least frustrate China, even if we cannot concede anything out of it? And I think again, the follow up question to that is that do we have the stomach and the political will to address what will be a consequence of that? So I think at this juncture, the Dalai Lama issue is the main kind of bone of contention. And from the Chinese perspective, despite the fact that it's been decades and decades, they believe that they have the right and the authority to be able to elect this leader of the Geluk sect. They believe they have leadership or authority over religious practices in Tibet, because they are a unifying quote unquote society, right? So the sad reality is that there is nothing India can do to assuage those concerns, especially at this time when there is conversation about a thaw in India-China relations. So this will continue to be a bone of contention, and that also tells you that this thaw is limited and temporary, just like some of the measures we've
Yeah,
undertaken on the
absolutely.
border.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what about
And
the
on
larger picture?
Yeah, the larger picture of India-China relations. So I think, and at Takshashila we did a survey of the two big things that are China related that are a problem for us. The first, very naturally, was the border issue. The second was China's footprint in the Indian neighborhood, and that was quite a
Hmm.
counterintuitive and surprising result for us, because we would have thought, oh, China's collusion with Pakistan, which again continues to be an important issue, but the footprint in the neighborhood is gaining a lot of awareness. And I think the big problem there is that, despite the fact that India has done well to position itself as a first responder or a net security provider, and these have been the stated objectives of the government, um, smaller states have a prerogative to hedge and balance if they can get benefits from two big powers, and
Which is
the Chinese
exactly
have
what
been
Sri
able to
Lanka
provide
and the
that.
Maldives have done.
Yes, Sri Lanka, Maldives, even Nepal, Myanmar,
And Nepal and
and
Myanmar.
yeah, and with China, I think the advantage is that they get is that the Chinese don't care who they're going to be dealing with. So in Myanmar, they don't care if they're going to be dealing with the junta or the Three Brotherhood Alliance in Rakhine, right? So they're selling weapons to both of them. In Maldives, they don't care if it's Soli or it's Muizu. And it's even better if it's Muizu, because Muizu is winning on an India out campaign strategy, right? So same with
Actually, I was correct. I was corrected when I was talking to somebody in the Maldives just recently, saying that India Out campaign was actually the one that was pursued by Yamin, and the beneficiary was Muse,
Hmm.
was the chief.
Yeah, no. In Maldives, this has always been a political back and forth, right? From Gayoom to Nasheed to Yamin to Soli and then to Muizu today. It's We have seen a consistent, slightly pro-India, slightly pro-China, which is what I said, right? These small states have a prerogative to hedge in bandwagon. And yes, Yamin anyway was the big signer on the BRI projects and
That's
all of
right.
those things, right? A lot of which Soli had to reverse. So this is a constant push and pull in Maldivian politics. And then when this example is generalized and applied to the example of political push and pull is applied to the neighborhood as a whole, you understand where India's problem vis-a-vis China comes in.
The ambassador also brought up the fact that China's might really comes from its economic strength. Can India move away from that situation at present when China is indispensable to India at the moment? I mean, it controls, as he said, 90% of rare earth exports. What is it that we can do to sort of diversify our sources and get away from this complete dependence on China for semiconductors and batteries for cars and so on and so forth? Is that something that is being looked at seriously by India?
Right. Yeah. No, I definitely think that this is a very important issue in the India-China relationship. How to de-risk and diversify, if not decouple. And again, even the last year's economic survey acknowledged this, that decoupling is not a realistic possibility, but we have to de-risk. And so most of the conversation revolves around how some extreme import dependencies can be mitigated, and in the process of doing that, can we also benefit domestic manufacturers, domestic exporters, so on and so forth. Now I think so when the question of de-risking is asked, both of these things have to come together. First is the recognition of products or investment areas where we do not want the risk of Chinese sale or Chinese investment, because let's face it, there is quite a lot of precedent to weaponization of economic dependency, not just by China but across the world. So, and the world is in general taking a protectionist turn. So it's understandable that India wants to be on that bandwagon. But then the second bit comes in, which is how realistic is it. So one thing is that you become fully self-reliant, like a uh, and looking inward for everything. But because of the progress of globalization so far, you need diversity in terms of resource providers and all of the little things that you've been importing from China, right? Everything from poker sets to tunnel boring machines. So that's a huge diversity of things that you've been importing for them. So, but poker sets maybe not as strategic as tunnel boring machines, right? So what do? You ask if this is something that we want to continue to put restrictions on. If yes, then we find alternative partners. So critical minerals is understandable, and Jay Shankar brought this up with Wangi as well, that there is some economic blockading of things, and that's not appreciated. So from the Chinese perspective, that policy makes sense because they also see India um, as a country with some potential in the China plus one dynamic, right? So this just goes beyond India China tension. Um, so I guess now that tendency has been to weaponize has been demonstrated, and you can't do it yourself internally, you can either continue importing from China, or you can find alternative countries or alternative producers. Now in critical minerals, I think Australia is one, because of the sheer degree of the sheer strength of the
Absolutely.
reserves that they have. In APIs and pharmaceuticals, I think India does well for itself, but but in the quad, and this is a suggestion that came up at Takshashila, we should establish a joint biomanufacturing hub, which could pool in resources, pool in active pharmaceutical ingredients, and eventually also work on healthcare related issues, right? So these are not only avenues to collaborate in these multilateral institutions, but also to find partners with the goal of diversification. Now with Australian critical minerals, I think again the question is, do we have those capabilities to process? Because it's not enough to have reserves, right? I think we found some reserves of lithium in J&K as well, but do we have
That's
the
right.
batch
And
the
in Kerala.
yeah. So it's about developing those processing capabilities, and then that's where your tax and tariff reform, land reforms, justification for the amount of PLI that you've given, all of that comes in, and then that's a discussion on economic reforms that's long pending and also long happening. But that is the first step to solving the de-risking question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Saxena. How do you see this, Ms. Saxena, about India's, very strong presence at SCO? We had India's foreign minister and strong views too. I mean, we had India's foreign minister Jaishankar stressing the importance of an open exchange of views, and the defense minister Rajnath Singh causing quite a flutter because he told his counterpart Dong Yun of the need for a permanent solution on border demarcation. I mean, the border treaty is based, I mean, not a border understanding really. It's just returning us to status quo ante, nothing more. And, there are, as the ambassador rightly said, over the last 5 years, there's been a very strong presence on both sides. So, what is this? Is this empty talk, or why is Delhi even posturing? I mean, is it posturing? Is it empty talk? Or does it actually think it's smart to demonstrate the zero tolerance to terrorism? Were we sending a message to China that you can't allow this continued support that it gives now to Pakistan? I mean, Rajnath Singh's visit also was the first by an Indian minister to China since the 2020 military standoff.
So the thing to understand about all the endeavor that has gone behind India's diplomatic engagement with stakeholders across the world, and the convincing that has gone behind uh, why there was a need to undertake Operation Sindoor, what India's stance is against terrorism, and why it's so important to India. The thing to understand behind all of that is that just like for China, there are things that are red lines. For India too, there are things that are red lines. So at the outset, wouldn't agree to this idea that from New Delhi's perspective, all of this tough talk on terrorism is just posturing. In fact, I would say that it is one of the most important cards that we hold for, as the External Affairs Minister said, open deliberations on all issues facing concerned parties in this SCO, right? Because there is so much deliberation about, oh, how SCO risks becoming an organization that is redundant for India because it's led by China. Pakistan is China's client state, so they're going to dominate the whole agenda. Russia is sidelined, so on and so forth. So if this fear actually exists, although we should take it with a grain of salt, if this fear actually exists, then there is no way that we should give up stating the problem and talking about solutions at a platform like this, because this is the only platform regionally and perhaps even globally where we can come face to face with Chinese representatives and Pakistani representatives and explain to them our situation. So, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh not signing on to the SCO statement, which condemned the bus attack in Balochistan but did not condemn the Pahalgam terror attack. I mean, that is plain and pure hypocrisy, right? And so, more than posturing, the symbolicism behind this is crucial because, and this is a fact of the India-China relationship, that there is an intense power asymmetry. But as Ambassador Kant said, that there has to be something, and colloquially we call these cards, right? But there has to be something that an independent agent in world politics has to be able to do, despite the power asymmetry, to make their case and put their point forth. So I think in that sense, what Defense Minister Rajnath Singh is doing is that, okay, he's acknowledging that the SCO or its regional anti-terrorism structure, all of them are not going to be able to help with the Pakistan problem. But what India then can do is that use it as a platform to voice its concerns, because we've seen this through 4 days of Op Sindhu, right? That narrative, it's important to win the narrative along with the war or the battle, and so I think this is an important maneuver in this
Yeah.
regard. Now, will this lead to the Pakistanis changing their trajectory, or
No.
the Chinese more sympathetic to Indian concerns? No. But eventually, what this does is that it and not only makes your voice heard, it assuages some of the fears about, oh, how the organization is being hijacked by Chinese interests and Chinese
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
thinking. And just on the India-China situation, I think, and SCO, I think New Delhi's kind of proactive stance on some of the issues, um, or or some symbolicism behind not backing down, that is essential when you're dealing with a power that, and this has been said multiple times, with a power that understands the currency of, well, power, right? So
Okay. That's
you may
well
not
put.
have
Yeah.
an actual card, and for these cards, we talk about the Tibet card, the Taiwan card, you need massive political will, you need resources and capacity behind all of this, you need asymmetric capabilities, especially in the military domain. But I think narrative is the first place, and communication is the first place where you have to start if you have to deal with a bully like China.
Yeah. Okay.